Welcome back, everyone, to NeuroAlchemy, where science meets soul and where healing becomes multidimensional, intuitive, and profoundly possible. I'm Dr. Sarah Young. Here on NeuroAlchemy, we define every term as if you're hearing it for the very first time. Because clarity creates safety, and safety opens the door to deeper healing possibilities. This is a space where we slow down, honor the nervous system, and explore healing in a way that respects the whole person: mind, body, emotion, and lived experience. Today, I'm joined by Lesley Andrew, an artist and art therapist whose work centers on creativity as a bridge between emotional healing, nervous system balance, and self understanding. Leslie's own path weaves together trauma, gynecological health challenges, identity shifts, and the often unspoken grief of being childless, not by choice. Through creativity, she found her voice again, and now she helps others reconnect to theirs. This conversation invites us to explore how expression becomes a lifeline, and how the body tells its story through art, and how creativity can help us reclaim meaning, agency, and purpose. Lesley, we are so glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming me onto the show. It's really good, great to be able to contribute.
Lesley, before we dive in, I always like to begin with a gentle arrival check in. How are you arriving today, either physically, emotionally, energetically, spiritually, or all of the above? Because lived experience is truly multidimensional.
Yeah, good. I'm in the UK, so it's sort of 8 p.m. right now as we're recording. So I'm like winding down. I've had quite a busy day, quite a few one-to-one clients that I've been working with face to face, traveling around quite a lot, and I'm all wrapped up in my like woolly hoodie, so it feels because it is very cold over here at the moment. So it does feel like I'm kind of winding down for the evening. So it's a really
You're
nice
ready
time
for
to come on.
recharging.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Before we go deeper into your story, I'd love to ground a few core concepts we'll be returning to throughout today's conversation. We do this intentionally so listeners can stay oriented and safe as they listen. For listeners who may be new to art therapy, how could you define it in simple, accessible terms?
Yeah. So combining like art, image making along with talking and expressing. So often people find that therapy is more about talking. However, sometimes people find it hard to talk about challenges, talk about emotions, and so actually the image becomes an additional way to express and communicate feelings and to hold on to something, maybe express some emotions. So there's a mixture of image making and talking combined and used for all kinds of different reasons.
When we talk about expression as healing, what does creativity offer that sometimes talking alone sometimes can't help with?
Yeah. So I suppose the thing with that is that there's a real strong kind of message of it being hard to talk about things sometimes, and often when we're going through a pain or going through something stressful, or there's been some trauma, there's been something happen in the past that's been traumatic, often words are not enough, or often that they're maybe not the right words to describe how someone's feeling or how somebody understands those experiences or those emotions. So actually being able to be creative and finding different ways to explore those things, whether it's using like different materials to doodle or scribble, or maybe big painting to really make something big and bold, whatever it is, it can be a less threatening way of processing emotions and expressing things and exploring and experimenting. And it can also be really good for confidence building, which I think a lot of my clients really experience that when they're maybe quite nervous about talking about something, and then we'll give an image to make, or like some materials to start to play with and experiment with. So a really good way of connecting with the subconscious mind as well, with connecting with what's really going on underneath.
How does creative expression support the nervous system in moving from overwhelm toward steadiness?
Yeah. So the thing with the nervous system is that we often, or with our emotions, is that we often think very much from our head. When we're feeling stressed, or when something happens, we often find that our head takes charge. Whereas the nervous system is much more deeper and much more about balance and much more about the body as well. Using art and using image making can be a way of calming the nervous system. Feel if someone's feeling agitated and stressed and up here, then they can feel that they maybe using something like a slow movement of a maybe using chalk pastels that's soft and smudging with your finger can be a good way to connect like something and feel calm in that sort of way. Or if somebody's nervous system is feeling quite flat and like they're feeling kind of quite withdrawn and flat, the nervous system might be in that shutdown or that freeze state, and doing something to activate and energize, like maybe big fast drawings or something in between, or something that might be a bit different to bounce out of it, to break the state out of it. So, and again, that's a non-threatening way of doing things, because sometimes people might not really know how they're feeling. They might not really know whether am I hypo aroused or am I hyper aroused. If I'm like feeling like withdrawn or down in mood, then do I want to do something that's going to really boost my mood, or do I want something to match where I'm at so that I can feel that I can understand my feelings more? And the creative process allows a sense of acceptance as well as change. So a bit like listening to music, if you're feeling really upset and you might put on a sad song, and people might question, well, actually, why might you listen to something sad? Maybe listen to something happier and it might boost your mood. However, actually the sad song can really help someone to feel understood and validate their emotions. And it's similar to making art, somebody making a very slow piece of art or something that illustrates an emotion can help their like that psychological safety, which is grounded in the nervous system. I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but it's like there's lots of research and there's lots of literature about that.
You work with grief that often isn't publicly acknowledged. How do you define disenfranchised or hidden grief?
Yeah. So the way that I kind of see sort of the see grief is that it's about a loss and it's about a lack, a sense of loss or lack, and maybe expectations being very different to how life has evolved. Typically somebody might be grieving. The most known grief would be like if there's been a bereavement, if somebody's died, someone's passed away, and that would be really understood. However, that disenfranchised grief, where that a lot of people feel when they feel that they shouldn't be upset about it, they shouldn't be grieving, and they maybe haven't got that support around them. And examples of that might be if someone's lost a pet, if someone's gone through maybe a redundancy, something like that. For me, it's about like my health and like some of the health issues that I've experienced, and like then coming to a finality of not having children. So then thinking what like my sense of feeling disenfranchised or it being hidden was more about it being maybe not necessarily being something that people expected from me to be upset about, because I didn't go through sort of IVF or anything like that. So I think there's a real, I suppose, misunderstanding about it. A lot of people feel that they can't express their grief, or that they feel it might be quite trapped for them.
When you speak about values guiding healing and identity, What does that mean in practice?
Yeah. So I would say that I talk a lot about expressing your true self, and the true self being like what's at the core. If you were to strip away all of the challenges, all the labels, all of the fog and the dust of everyday life, and all of those kind of the impact of the trauma and the emotions, what would be really at the core? And if somebody's feeling like really fresh and confident, then actually their core self and their true self can really shine. However, if someone's feeling really overwhelmed, or they've maybe got some patterns or some core beliefs that aren't very empowering for them, then actually they might feel that their identity is maybe this. It might have there might be a scarcity identity of I'm stuck here, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved, or I'm not worthy. And actually, when I speak to people about express your true self, when they haven't been doing sort of a piece of healing work to really sort of allow themselves to shine and the best version of themselves to come through, they believe that their true self is that wounded self, that's that, oh, it is my true self, I'm just not good enough. And they feel that with certainty. However, actually, when people are working through, there's a possibility of something new, and image making can do that because we can make different types of images. We can put a crown on our head if we wanted to. We can change an elephant into a dinosaur if we wanted to. We can transform those things. We can test out different ideas, and that in turn can give that possibility of a new identity or a more refreshed version, a better version of yourself where you're feeling more expanded and freer and more confident.
Can you share the moment when creativity shifted from something you did into something that truly helped you heal?
Okay, so I mean, there's loads of moments for me across my life. I think a really good example of this, I think probably the most recent early moment is when I was recovering from a hysterectomy, which is around 2 years ago. And this is part of my story. And at the time, I was immediately after, I was feeling like a mixture of feeling free, feeling relief that I was no longer going to be in pain, but also feeling like quite quite confused and quite lost, and there was some of that grief was coming up for me. So whilst physically I couldn't do a massive amount, I could sit on the sofa, I could sit with my sketchbook and draw and doodle, and I was making a lot of art at that time, watching a lot of TV, making a lot of art, and I was making art specifically about my condition and about what like making an effort to like really allowing myself to pause, really allowing myself to rest. And that to me felt really healing because it wasn't just like a recreational thing. Sometimes I'd made art before where I've very much been expressing feelings and expressing those emotions. However, that did feel really significant. Like all of the art leading up to the operation as well fits in with that theme of really something that felt really embodied, as well as something that was like illustrative of the pain, and like of maybe drawing uterine fibroids which were in my body that were taking over almost, and that becoming a piece of art. So I'd start off drawing maybe some of the things that felt quite painful, and then adding different details and adding patterns to it, and then they became, I suppose, more beautiful really in themselves. So rather than it being something that was ugly and expressive and messy and painful and capturing that, it became more like a mandala and like something that was floaty, transforming that into something. Actually, there's a possibility with this. I was doing things that were um partly symmetrical and partly sort of rotational. So that felt really useful to do. And some of those pieces have gone on to, some of those in my book, I've gone and developed further images from. like more paintings from.
You've shared about uterine fibroids and how emotional stress intertwined with physical symptoms. What connection did you notice between your body and your inner world?
Mm. So there were, if I was to rewind a little bit to sort of give an explanation as to my journey with uterine fibroids. So just for the audience, that uterine fibroids are non-cancerous tumours that are found in the uterus wall or on the inside of the wall, or sometimes kind of they're on stalks sticking out and in different places. And I I first found out I had them back in 11 or 12, 2011. So quite a long time ago, and I had surgery to have some removed in 2013, and then they discovered that they'd grown back. So 2024, I then had a hysterectomy. And just for context, it's been sort of going over that long time. And a lot of women, like there's so many women that experience this, that it might not cause any major bother, and other people that it really does have a big impact on their lives. And what I noticed for me was that I'd be severely anemic. I'd have really heavy, painful periods. My energy levels would be really low. And there'd be days where I just wouldn't be able to work because I'd be in so much pain. And at the time, sort of in lead up to that, I've always been a very active person, and I had to stop doing the things that I love doing, like hiking and like running and going to the gym. And I remember there was a time when me and my friends went hiking in Wales, North Wales, and there's some beautiful mountains there. It's just amazing. And I just stayed in bed most of the time while they went and explored. And it just felt like for me that there was that message of not being able to do things. There was a real, like, you have to, almost being forced to stop, like being forced to not do the things that I really enjoy. And it did feel upsetting, and it took a lot of effort for me to really be compassionate towards myself, to sort of to really feed myself the kind of nourishment that I needed. That took a lot of energy. That sort of psychological nourishment, that kindness, because I would be questioning, why is it that I've got this? Is it because I've eaten too much sugar, or is it something to do with that? Is it something to do with trauma in my body? Has something like that going on? And it's weird how we often question ourselves when actually it's just a physical thing. But we try to make sense of these things. And there was an article that I read. I don't know who wrote it, but it was a long time ago. And it was making a connection between fibroids and the uterus and creativity. And it's saying when you don't have, this is really badly, I'm really butchering this, but when you don't have children, when the body wants, like women need to, and people need to be creating. And typically, if you, as a result of not having children, if you don't have children, your body will create something. So, so that maybe there's the biology of that. I don't know the science. I don't know whether that's true at all. But it was that idea of, okay, well, I need to be creating. If I'm not having children, if I, at the time, the circumstances didn't match with that, I need to be making sure that I'm creating a life that I want. I need to be truly expressing myself, because otherwise my body will express itself for me in a negative way. So I think this is where then leaning into, that's when I then went and studied art therapy, like after that first surgery, in order to really do that for myself and for other people, that I knew that I was teaching at the time and that wasn't what I wanted to do. So it's very much about making that link between what's going on in the body and what I want out of life, and what those emotions were, what was coming up for me at different times.
What do you wish healthcare providers understood about the emotional layers of physical pain?
Yeah, that's such a good question because it's so important, isn't it? I think a lot of people really struggle with that, and I think that, you go to your doctor or you go to an appointment and it's very much about the physical, and you do have sometimes like you go and people are compassionate, but they're so rushed. So I think just being able to recognize that it's maybe not like take the personal part of it out, because it can feel very personal, but also treat people as individuals. So you can, I think that if people recognize, if the health systems and the health like individuals recognize that people do feel personal about their health, they do question their lifestyles. And I mean, maybe not everybody. Maybe it is just like when you're conscious of things like, oh, should I have drank more water? Should I have done this? And just recognize that the emotional impact of that, and how much it impacts the lifestyle. How if something as simple as someone breaking a leg can have a huge impact on someone's lifestyle and what they can do. And but a broken leg can be fixed quite quickly, whereas more chronic health issues can have more of a slower impact on somebody's lifestyle and their life. And I think, yeah, more understanding of that, I think, would be useful, especially maybe that acknowledgement of the motivation behind it. So times when I was probably anemic, I thought I was just unfit, and I was saying to people, I'm really trying here. I'm trying really hard. I'm like, I'm just really slow. This is as fast as I can go with running. This is where I'm at. And I felt, I don't think people were judging me, but I felt judged as though you're just not trying, or you're just not very disciplined at training. But the reality was I was probably becoming anemic at that time. And I didn't know, because we just, things like that come up slowly. Yeah.
Yeah, we tend to push, 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 and we second guess ourselves. We're kind of trained to go, 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 do, 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 take care of everything, be superhuman in many ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did creativity support you where medicine alone fell short?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say I can give an example here about sort of perimenopause, I think, really. Is stepping into sort of thinking about hormones and thinking about kind of the emotional impact of midlife. And actually, so many people, when they're feeling anxious or depressed or stressed about something, end up having like some medication. And there are times when medication can be really helpful, but actually being able to do something to boost your mood and to feel good and to feel like calmer makes so much difference. Like, and especially in those times when I couldn't do a massive amount physically, and I would be right, actually, I'm going to be really disciplined to make a piece of art. I'm going to get my sketchbook out. So right now I'm sat on my sofa. I have an art studio upstairs. So there'll be times when I make something and it's very, very cozy, and I'm making something that's in my sketchbook, like a little doodle or something. And there's times when, and that's more, I need to regulate and chill and relax. A bit like if I was to sit and crochet or knit. And then there's times when I'm like, right, actually, I'm gonna go into my art studio and I'll put some music on, and that's when I make something bigger. So these are things like, it's working out really what the intention of it is. So I have a model called the Focus 5. It's the Art Heals Focus 5. And there's 5 different elements: activate, regulate, explore, express, empower. So depending on how I was feeling, and depending on how people are feeling when they're like, maybe they're emotionally overwhelmed or whatever it is, when they're approaching art, that it might be about activating it. Activation's about getting into a routine. It's about behavior activation, which is about planning something in the day with the intention of that boosting your mood. So you might not feel like doing it. Sometimes we don't feel like going for a walk, but when it's scheduled in and you're doing it regardless, then that can really help. And having just 5 minutes of art making serves to do that. But then yeah, and that's often the kind of starting point, and then choosing whether it's having that balance between regulating emotions compared to expressing emotions. That comes up for a lot of my clients, where they're probably doing both really a lot of the time and experimenting. So whilst actually there's a lot of overlap, I think for people to be able to say, actually, I'm feeling quite flat right now. I need to boost my mood. I'm going to make this piece of art to help my mood. Or it might be that they're they're wanting to do it for some other reason. So that's helped me as well.
What tends to happen mentally, emotionally, or physically when someone hasn't had a safe place to express themselves?
So I spoke to somebody recently at an event. It was a wellbeing event. I had a stall. I had an art therapy stall. I was doing a talk as well. And someone approached me and said that she'd been doing some art therapy or invited to make some art to express herself. And I don't know what the person who the person was or anything. It's like I don't know any of the details. But she was saying she just felt really uncomfortable doing it, and she didn't really know where to start. I think it was maybe someone. It wasn't an art therapist. It was somebody like I don't know what their credentials were or anything. And because she'd mentioned it to me because she felt that there was a difference between doing it with an art therapist who would understand the subtleties and the sort of nuances of it compared to maybe she said she was told to just draw anything, and she felt really overwhelmed by that. So actually, sometimes we can have that direct, like non-directive approach where people are invited to start from somewhere and not really have a plan. And some people feel safe to do that, whereas other people might not. So I'd often have like little exercises that people can do to, I suppose, break the ice to get started. I suppose part of what can be quite damaging really is that if you're I suppose one of the things with art therapy is that it can unlock emotions and uncover emotions that might not be expected, sort of feel like they're coming from nowhere. And sometimes people can express something and they've got lots of paint dripping everywhere and it can feel too much. And it's my job as the art therapist to sort of go, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to have a tray, or we're going to have lots of paper towels, or we're going to use a different type of paint that might not be as drippy, might not be as runny, or we're going to make sure that it's paint that washes off really easily, because actually we can clean up the mess and that's great. However, if you're then covered in paint and you're taking it home with you, or you're left with this paint all over you all night, then that might not feel safe for you. So there's those kind of things, and it's being able to help people to feel grounded and to, I suppose, maybe get to know what it is that's going on for them. So, okay, this feels too much. I'm going to sit back and go, maybe be mindful about what's in front of me. I can see the blue paint, I can see the green paint, I can see that's dripping, rather than be stuck in the emotion.
Being childless, not by choice, is a deeply personal grief many people silently carry. How did this shape your healing journey as well as your sense of self?
Say that my sort of identity, I suppose, as a woman without children, lies in that realm of childless by circumstances, not by choice, or child free, childless. I can bounce between both words, child free by circumstances, childless, and I think there's a lot about there's a those interchangeable words, and I think I was struggling because there's groups of people who are child free by choice, and then there's groups of people who are, or the desire to have children, and it's a real need. They've got that real innate desire to be a mum, and they may have gone through a lot of painful things. They may have gone through IVF cycles, and they may have so many different reasons. And actually, I kind of think that sitting in the middle can feel quite a lonely space. It can feel very lonely being in both spaces, but then sitting in that middle of, are you that or are you that? And I think, Sarah, that's where that sort of disenfranchised sort of grief comes in, because for somebody might understand that when there's been a loss rather than a lack, there's a difference. And they might understand, recognize, oh, there's IVF. I know what that looks like. I can see, can imagine what that's like. Whereas what I was finding is that my circumstances were more about having, not wanting to be a single parent particularly. And like I was always very career focused, and I changed careers at the time. Had I not changed careers, and if I was in a stable relationship at the time, that's when I may have had a child. However, that wasn't my life pattern. And so when it came to the hysterectomy and suddenly I got this kind of overwhelming grief, these big feelings that I didn't really know where they'd come from. Cognitively, it didn't make sense. But my subconscious mind, my world just felt like really empty for a good chunk of time. And I had to really make that effort to get clear on my purpose and to think, well, who am I beyond all this? Linking back to what I was saying about how hard it is when you can't do things because you might not have the fitness, your health doesn't have the energy, that a lot of my identity I'd put down to being a runner, doing hiking, and being an artist as well was really important to me. However, actually, I needed to really double down on that and have a sense of, well, it's okay to sit in between and sit in that messy middle. Because I think my family, a lot of my family were probably quite surprised that was something that came up for me that I was upset about. Because they're like, oh, it was Auntie Lesley. like we wouldn't have thought that that's what you would have wanted particularly. But, and neither did I, especially. Although I was never at a point really where I went, I don't want children. It was never, I don't want children. There was never the child-free conversation. It was very much the circumstances. So I do think that it can feel like very lonely, but then actually the more we look for the challenge, the more we find more the challenges. When we look for spaces where there are other women like ourselves, then we find that, don't we?
What would you want listeners carrying hidden grief to know about themselves?
I'd say it's okay. It's okay to feel those feelings. Your feelings matter, and that it's important to recognize that those emotions are perfectly valid and there's not anything wrong with you, that you can express those feelings, and yeah, it's allowed.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that out loud. How does creativity help the body move from overwhelm into steadiness?
Okay. So if someone's overwhelmed, like that could mean all sorts of things, because overwhelmed with what? Overwhelmed with anxiety, overwhelmed with anger, overwhelmed with shame, overwhelmed with grief, like sadness. And what that essentially means is that it's very full. So if I was to link back to think about sort of the model of grief that's called growing around grief, that this idea of like a feeling, like the grief, we sometimes have this illusion that our grief, those feelings, if we can associate this with any emotion that we're experiencing that feels overwhelming, that feels all consuming, we're feeling anxious and it's taking over us, and grief can do that. So grief like can feel like that your whole life has changed. And instead of thinking, well, we want to shrink the grief over time, we want to do something to shrink the anxiety within us. Now, there are things that you can do to calm the mind and calm that anxiety. And art making and creativity can help with that. And it can also expand your life around it. So if we've got this experience of anxiety that feels overwhelming, that's taken over, instead of beating ourselves up about it and thinking, I can't possibly get past this because this is just all of me, It might become someone's identity. They might say my anxiety instead of the anxiety I'm experiencing. Then being creative and doing different activities can expand their life, expand the possibilities around that. So it's growing around that emotion and building things. So rather than constantly feeling pressure to reduce that anxiety, we're making the anxiety less dominant in our world. And because when you start to see things in a different way, things can change. And that feels really refreshing, actually, that there's not that pressure. It takes away that pressure to reduce the problem and to reduce the anxiety, to reduce those sad feelings. And it allows people to be able to sit with those feelings instead of feeling something wrong with feeling that.
What simple, accessible, creative practices could someone begin today, even without an art background?
Okay. So I think that anybody can access art. You don't have to have an art background. You don't have to have like a special talent or any skills or anything like that. Sometimes people say things like, I'm just not very creative. However, if you can hold a pen or hold a crayon and wiggle your hand, you can scribble. And scribbling is a really good way to start. And you could even use both hands. So a scribble or a doodle, doing a doodle a day, it could be as small as a minute in time or 10 seconds to do a scribble. And I'd encourage you to put the time aside to do that. Like, if you want to spend longer than a minute or 5 minutes, by all means do. Doesn't have to look like anything. It could purely be a scribble.
How do you help people release the pressure to do it right?
Yeah. So that's similar really to what I was saying. I think doing making something on purpose that looks ugly, I think is a good help with that. I work with a lot of people who struggle to get started because they are really conscious of making it accurate. And I also work with people who really enjoy art and they're very talented. They've got some accuracy with their drawing. And when it comes to expressing themselves, they are maybe a bit stuck between I want to express this, I also want to draw really accurately. And so certain things like using a different art material can help with that. So for instance, using chalk pastels instead of oil pastels. So oil pastels can smudge, but they're quite solid. Chalk pastels are more soft and maybe there's less likelihood of an accurate line. So it takes a lot of courage for someone to do that, but allowing that permission to make a mess and permission to do something inaccurately can be really helpful. And one of the things that I've kind of started to kind of really see is that balance between them. So rather than instantly say, okay, well, we're just going to do something messy on purpose that could be intimidating for someone, like we said before about if it feels too much, then it might not feel safe, is just to do a little bit at a time and test out. Can we press on more firmly? Can we draw something? Can we draw with our left hand if we're right-handed? What would it be like if we put it under our chin and drew like that? Or put our pencil in our mouth? So, like, make it playful and make it acknowledge that it is tricky to start. And I take it for granted sometimes that I've always made art. It's like all my life. And if I was starting a new skill, if I was, I don't know, if I was doing something that was very completely new to me, then I'd be cautious as well. So I'd want it to be bite-sized pieces.
You've said emotional and physical health are deeply connected. How has this played out in your own healing and your work with others?
Yeah. It's it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think we often kind of say, okay, well, I'm a bit achy. I'm like, oh, I've got a bit of an achy neck and I've got a headache and oh, maybe it's like that's down to stress or I get migraines sometimes. Sometimes that's been down to stress or if I've not slept very much and actually being able to think, well, okay, well, I'll try and relax. It's like then you try and relax too much, then it can feel too stressed. But there's so many things that actually, if I was if I was achy and thinking I'm achy because I'm stressed, and then I go out for a walk and I feel more relaxed, and I might the ache still could be there, but then I'm feeling more relaxed and I don't, or it might have gone. To me, it's not necessarily a magic formula. It's about doing those small things and just recognize times when you've been still with your body and times when you're nurturing your body to heal your mind and the other way around.
You've spoken about values guiding through transition and uncertainty. How do creativity and authenticity support people in building a life that feels true?
Mm, I think this is really important, and it links back to what we were saying about, you know, the true self and identity, and what is it about the individual that makes them them? What's their essence? Certain things that people think, well, actually, I really value travel, for instance, or I really value this, that, the other. There's lots of different things that you might value in your life. And it's about really thinking about what's important to you and what's important to actually to you, not what's important to other people. Your family members or your friends might have other things, and there might be other reasons why that's important. But thinking what's at the core of it. So I'll say things like, what's important to me is authenticity. You kind of, well, okay, sure. So that's everyone being authentic, but when are you the most authentic? So then it's going deeper. It's going deeper for me and saying, okay, well, I'm more authentic when I'm being curious, when I'm being playful, when I'm being courageous. These are the values that I really enjoy. Being creative and connecting with people. So I have a thing, authentic connected expression. So, but yeah, being authentic could be so many different things for people. Whilst when we're going on this journey and we're going off on a little path that way and a path that way, and as long we could keep going back and keep going up and down and around, and if our compass point is pointing one way based on our values and we're heading that way, then we might not be able to achieve the things that we all want to achieve instantly. However, we can still meet that need because of the values. So when I was struggling to go hiking and I was missing that exploration and that adventure, I was then making an effort to see that to explore new things in my artwork, or to see maybe I'd go out with my camera locally and I walk around this local area, and it all, when I don't really look carefully, it all just looks the same. But when I make an effort to tune into the unusual and really explore, then there's that curiosity that's kind of, oh, I'm approaching this from a position of curiosity and adventure, even though it's literally walking around my estate, walking around the houses locally. I've seen them over and over again, and that can bring about some of the, not exactly the same as if you were traveling or going up a mountain, but it can feel that because the intentions there matches with the value.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for that, Leslie. And I know you have offered a couple of things now that would be fine for what I'm going to say next, but
Mm.
feel free to share with what's on your soul for the moment. So, we love to do a listener's invitation. So, have you come up with a simple daily practice that they can try every day over the next 7 or more days, right?
Mm.
Just to try things out to open a new doorway. So, what would you recommend for our listeners for this week's listener invitation?
Yeah. So I think giving yourself time to pause would be my biggest invitation. So I suggested before about the doodling and doing doing something that is maybe quite quick like that. A framework that I have in the work that I do is called a new pace, and it's pause, act, create, empower, and pause being the first one. So actually a huge invite to you is to allow yourself to pause. And I need to remind myself this every single day. Allow yourself to pause, and with an intention of pausing so that you can then act. So pausing so that you can live your life in a way that feels aligned to your values. And it might just be, it could be that you, while you're waiting for the bus or something, or while you're brushing your teeth, you like just allow yourself just to kind of acknowledge that you're present, or stare at the wall for a few minutes. You don't need to be doing anything really big. So, I know some people like do breathing exercises or meditations and mindfulness, and that's really great. It's not essential, but literally allowing yourself time to rest and pause. If you do that every day and see how you feel, see if there was anything that was stopping you or any thoughts that were maybe getting in the way, and criticisms that were, "Oh, you're not allowed to pause," and you're kind of, "Well, I'm gonna pause." So, and then see how it feels afterwards.
What is one feeling, insight, or possibility you hope most of our listeners will walk away with today hearing our conversation?
I think I would say that a mixture of kind of acceptance and an allowance of mistakes to happen. So that's maybe part of that acceptance. Yeah, acceptance and sort of going with the flow. Going with the flow. So that fits really well with the creative element of creating something, and just being aware of times when you're in control of the line that you're drawing or painting, or times when the paint might be dripping, and seeing how that sort of accepting what happens with that. Yeah, a lot of my own sort of journey. When I've talked about physically healing, I've talked about physically healing from my surgery. And then the bigger piece has been a more emotional healing. And it's a life journey, isn't it? It's a lifetime thing that we're ups and downs all our life, and the nervous system regulation. So just having that patience. I'm giving you loads of different things here. It's like you can't pick just one. That allow what's going to happen, and it be okay accepting it.
Leslie, thank you for sharing your heart, your story, and the healing wisdom that emerges through creativity. Thank you to everyone listening to this episode of NeuroAlchemy, where the nervous system, expression, and multidimensional healing meet. If something you heard today was helpful, or if you think it might support someone you love, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the show. It helps these conversations reach the people who need to hear them the most. Until next time, take gentle care of your mind, your body, and your inner world. Bye for now.